Hello again, everybody. Welcome to the Doomer Optimism podcast. Today we have Dakotah Apostolou from the Cohere Network, and we're going to be talking about how we can catalyze and jumpstart regenerative communities, regenerative living, how we can get around some of the issues with commodified housing markets, and how we can move in a more regenerative direction and get around some of these bottlenecks that many of us run into. So I think Dakotah has a lot to say about that, and his network, they're doing a lot of really innovative things. So with that kind of preface, welcome, Dakotah. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. Good to be here with you.
Cool. So why don't you give us a little bit of background about who you are? Tell us, a version of your story, whatever version is
Sure.
appropriate that you feel appropriate, and give us a kind of a lead into what the Cohere Network is all about.
Yeah. Yeah, happily. Let's see. My background's in architecture. I trained at the Lloyd Wright School of Architecture, and my kind of career evolved from doing like really bougie, over the top, high end homes into how do we use architecture for social impact? How do we use architecture in the built environment to make meaningful difference in living in a regenerative way? And that really evolved into Cohere and what we're doing with Cohere, because even in the impact architecture I was doing, it left me feeling like we were only making a drop in the bucket in terms of how do we actually create systemic radical change. And for us, that what evolved in our thinking and our point of view is that it all comes down to the economics. How do we actually start to shift the economics of the built environment to provide access to equity for everybody? And how do we do that in a way that starts to build a new closed loop economy where we inherently gain more by stewarding the land, living in right relations with the earth, and collaborating? That was really kind of the drive behind Cohere, is like in the most practical way. How do we do that in incremental baby steps and move the needle forward to a better way of living, a way that, we all want to live, but many people don't seem to have access to because of the crony capitalistic market that we're in.
Hmm. Nice. Okay. And do you want to get into some of the ways that you're doing that Cohere Network is
Yeah,
doing that?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the one of the big things for us was, um, yeah, I don't know how deep to get into the weeds on the how, but you tell me how far we want to go into that. But on the high level, anytime a member of Cohere contributes value into Cohere, they gain equity in Cohere.
And
And
what do you mean by contribute value?
yeah, that can vary from I want to come and build out a food forest, or I want to come chef, or hell, I want to do some graphic designs for a new pitch deck for another property. Our goal is to put out as many things because we're member owned and we want to be member built. So anytime we can put out bounties in the Web3 space is called, or just jobs or tasks, we want to put that out to our members. And then in exchange for that, people are just getting paid fair market rates. So if you're a graphic designer and you get paid $80 an hour, great. We'll pay you $80 an hour equivalent in securities in Cohere.
Mhm.
And in this way, we provide access because quite a few people have incredible and very, very important skills that aren't valued in the marketplace.
Mhm.
For instance, like right now in an age of, the earth rebalancing or climate change, whatever you want to call it, the ability to grow your own food is pretty high in the value prop.
Right.
And yet, in most of the intentional living communities and structures, you come to a place, you work your ass off for 10 years, and you put all this sweat equity into a property, increasing the property value, but you're not getting equity, increasing the value of the land $50,000. And so, what we've done is create something called dynamic equity. You put in value, and you're going to get ownership in the entire global ecosystem.
Quick question. So you said, putting in value, getting paid fair market rates, but then you also said that the market often undervalues people's talents. And so if somebody is putting in value where their value is undervalued in the market, how does that work?
It's a great question that there's some a friend of mine, Charlotte from Protopia, was sharing how Traditional Dream Factory has a Web3 tool for this,
Mm-hmm.
where people can basically vote on the value we ascribe to each other's contributions.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some sister orgs that are developing really cool ways of creating new value structures such that a community can say, hey, we believe that gardening is actually worth $80 an hour, not $20 an hour. So the long and the short of it is we don't know what's best. We
Mm-hmm.
really don't. We're starting. One of the critical things for us in Cohere is how do we just practically move the needle forward and be a bridge from game A into game B.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're starting with pretty mediocre systems at the moment,
Uh,
and we want to continue to grow the meta network. And Cohere's intention is we house the change makers, right? We have all these digital nomads who are traveling around the world.
mm-hmm.
And Cohere is building these co-living, co-working communities around the world
Mm-hmm.
where we're intentionally giving preferred access to the people who are helping to grow the meta modernist renaissance, whatever we want to call the movement afoot.
Mm-hmm.
Our intention is to continually limit Cohere's scope. We are member owned real estate. That's what we're doing.
Uh,
We create a container to house the change makers. We bring together the experts who know better than me or our team on these more exalted ways of measuring value or
mm-hmm.
the new tool sets. We don't know. We don't know most of the things, but we want to be of service to housing the leaders who do know, who have been working 30 years on like holacracy or other systems that are far more effective.
Hmm. Okay, interesting. You mentioned moving from game A to game B. You mentioned the term metamodernism. You mentioned the term renaissance. I know what those words mean because I came kind of out of the liminal web scene. But do you want to describe what does that mean to you? Like what is this kind of larger, kind of deep meta historical kind of narrative that you're working with here?
Yeah, I the way I think about it is it occurs to me that we're entering into an era, or at least in my reality bubble, where more and more people are realizing that the situation is pretty not so good.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the collapsing global ecosystem, in terms of collapsing local ecosystems, in terms of the rise of extremism and the collapse of democracy. Like a lot of people are realizing shit's getting real, pardon my language. Things are getting pretty severe.
Mm-hmm.
And so it occurs to me in my reality that more and more people are like kind of quote unquote standing up for humanity, the
Mm-hmm.
rights of nature movement, the post growth institute. There's all of these sister orgs that are incredible people saying, hey, it's time for us to make a difference. It's
Mm-hmm.
time for us to coordinate and stop competing with each other and figure out what the heck we do about this dire situation we're in and do it in a way that can create hope. Because oftentimes, like when you tell a single parent that is barely making ends meet that that they should be concerned that the Salt Lake is drying up and they're going to have a toxic cloud and it's going to be 5 times worse, and that there's like a real likely complete lack of water in your region in the coming years.
Mm-hmm.
Who the hell can handle that if you're barely making ends meet?
Mm-hmm.
And so it occurs to me that people then put their head in the sand because it's like the gravity of the situation is too big to deal with. And I think that there is, however, a movement of people being like, yeah, the situation is real. So let's step up to the plate. Let's work together and figure out what we can do to get in right relations for the betterment of humanity and do anything and everything we can to steer the ship in the right direction through hope. That's that's the movement that I don't know if metamodernism encapsulates or accurately defines, but that's what I feel that we're part of and want to be in support of.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, if I were to ask somebody to give a description of what we're trying to do with Doomer Optimism, that would be a good one. We have many perspectives, so that's cool. It seems like we're pretty aligned. So tell me more about kind of getting, putting in work, putting in your value into the network and getting kind of this equity into the network and what does that mean? That means that I put in some work and then that means I can stay at one of these eco villages or something for a month or something. Is that kind of what you're describing, or can you unpack that more?
The way, so like what we've designed a rent to own model, but
Mm,
right now we're not ready to roll that out. And we have a very specific game plan of what we can do now and what we can do in the future.
mm,
Right now, what we're providing is we're about to launch a formal founding membership drive where we're opening up our membership to 250 people who we believe are just really value aligned, doing the work, really making a difference. And one of the key things for us in Cohere is like we're not just out to house any digital nomad. We're out to house change makers who are living a lifestyle as a global citizen and want to network effect and grow their initiative through deep, meaningful trust and connection.
mm,
So we're launching an online community that provides access for everyone to everyone else, where you can post what you need help, what you want to be of contribution to. You have preferred access to the locations that we're starting and onboarding.
mm,
And in addition, if you so choose to contribute to growing out Cohere, you can gain equity in Cohere like a co-op.
mm.
I mean, we're basically a glorified co-op mixed with a REIT in effect.
Right.
So then we're opening up properties around the world where our members have first right to rent those locations.
Mm,
And their rent, the majority of that rent is going back to that local location to continue to increase the vitality of that location.
mm,
When a location is in the Cohere network, when Cohere even owns a tiny bit of that location, it now becomes an asset on our books. And we can now pay our members in securities of Cohere to make improvements to that location.
mm,
And that allows us to say, like, so the property we're like moving into in Costa Rica next month is really sweet property. It was started with some friends who are, like cool, like software engineers doing some really cool stuff on the websites. They don't want to run a hospitality venue, but they're really committed to the movement. They're building out a member owned Amazon basically, and they're doing really rad work. But they have this beautiful venue, but they don't want to run it. So Cohere's coming in. We're going to take over operations. We're going to rent it to our members with the preferred access to people who are aligned with kind of the initiative behind their whole thing. And we also provide a series of jobs. If people want to come in and help us build out the next 5 cabins, well, they can. And they can gain equity rather than just being paid in fiat.
mm,
And as we grow the value of the entire network, the value of everyone's shares go up in value.
mm,
And because that equity is not fixed, because we put that equity on blockchain in a way that's compliant with the SEC, with the US regulation bodies, people can now sell that equity and have an exit.
mm,
So, normally like in capitalism right now, or I say in venture capital, or just the business world at large, people invest in a company. And if you're an unaccredited US citizen, you can't really invest in companies. There's a very strong limit of how much money you can invest if you're not accredited. So you're kind of cut out of the entire upside of that marketplace.
mm,
And so you put all this money into a company, but now the shareholders want that company to be bought out by the monopoly. So there can be a huge exit and they get their cash plus their profit.
mm,
And so all the shareholders are incentivized to sell out to the next biggest company that
mm,
has like some bloated and crazy valuation. They've got all the cash anyway, so they can say, we'll buy it for $1 billion.
mm,
So there's no way for people to put in, get equity, and then do something with that equity. Well, by leveraging blockchain, we're actually able to change that. People can sell their shares in the secondary markets. Those shares could be speculated on. And now you can get value and you can exit back into the larger fiat ecosystem if you so want.
mm. Are you worried about something like a bank run? You know what I mean? Like it, you know, as long as things are going well, there's kind of this, positive reinforcing virtuous feedback loop. This sounds good, but let's say that there's a natural disaster, one of the locations gets severely damaged. People, because it's in these speculative markets, decide, oh, this is not a good investment for me, so I'm going to pull it out. And a lot of people decide to do that. Are you worried about that possibility?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a possibility. I mean, like the black swan events and like the extreme nature of weather today is always a risk. The What we're doing is everything has risk at the end of the day.
Yeah.
We believe, however, that the new gold is food, water, resilient buildings with coherent community. We believe that that's the most important hedge above all else. And if you have access to that, well, it doesn't matter how big you get the biggest portfolio in the world, but if you don't have food, water, resilient buildings with coherent community, well, good luck in time in an era of radical climate change, right? In an era of like destabilized geopolitics.
Right.
So we believe that is, for us, the most important store of value. That's the gold for us. Now, as we build more and more of these hard assets, more and more of these communities, that creates a fairly stable base value. However, yeah, I mean, like the title, like if we have a 7.8 earthquake and lose a property, yeah, that's gonna reduce the hard floor backing, and that is just the reality of any real estate. Now we're building in a way that is resilient to natural disasters. We're building in a way with the best regenerative practices, all the things, the best we can do. But at the end of the day, we're building out this pool of assets that are decentralized. So we start to shed some of the risk profile.
Right.
So McKinsey recently told the friend Tony Cho, the founder of Future Cities, that the biggest transfer of wealth in human history was to Florida during COVID. That's what he was told. And if you go to Florida right now, there is an insane building boom. And so people are putting tons of money into real estate because of the risk of the stock market being overvalued, collapsed crypto. Where are you going to put your money? And a ton of money is going into real estate. And a ton of money for like building a condo on Miami Beach, to me, is insane because the Thwaites Glacier melting is a real freaking thing. And so by owning a share of equity in a pool of assets, inherently reduces some of the risk, but it's not risk-free, of course.
Okay. So it seems, I was looking through kind of the account of Cohere and stuff, and seeing some of the pictures, and it seems like a bunch of young, attractive kind of techno hipsters, and that's cool. It's very attractive kind of thing. But what I didn't see much of was families. I didn't see much of people who would look like locals in the places that you're at. So I guess my broader question is, and this also relates to kind of my concern with some of the ideas floating around, like Logi's network state, for example, which seems to me kind of like a new neo-gentrification, a new form of basically going into an area, buying it up, basically colonizing it, and, for the most part, being kind of insular, right? Not integrating with the surrounding cultures, with the surrounding communities. And so I'm curious, have you guys thought about these issues and in terms of how you want to evolve?
Yeah, we've been in this space for a while, assessing how we can address some of these systemic ingrained issues. I'd say our brand right now is fairly outdated. I mean, as a startup, we're constantly like, oh my gosh, how can we get this done in time before our capital runs out and all those things. But we are about to like really launch a big brand update with the launch of our founding member campaign, where we really speak more to the ethos publicly in our marketing around who we're pulling in. So a critical thing for me is not to judge anyone by their race, their ethnicity, their sex, their gender, their identification of any sort. To me, none of that is important. What's important is access, and access to opportunity, access to the things that many people who are in disenfranchised communities never had access to. And one of that ways that gets expressed is gentrification. Right. So like in the village I'm here right now in Sunana, it's in at the Lake Atitlan, where I'm today. You have one of the poorest communities in Guatemala and a huge influx of Westerners buying up land and building, amazing retreat centers and whatnot.
Right.
Now there's endemic to, or just ingrained in the human condition, is people always moving around the world. And, this is kind of part of the human experience. However, when a local population doesn't have any ability to have access to the upside of the valuation increase, well, then they get gentrified. Now, Now, Cohere is not able to solve, endemic issues per se. But what we're really interested in is imagine if the stonemason, or imagine if a local any person who's in a Cohere location is not only getting paid in the local currency, but is getting paid in equity.
Mhm.
That those locals are literally becoming shareholders of this entire ecosystem. And now they're also owners and they're getting the upside and the profit and the valuation increase. And they're not cut out of the market because they don't have enough capital to play the game.
Mhm.
Now, that's not an end all be all solution, but that's one that we think is radically a radical step in the right direction.
Yeah.
The other thing is like, how do we make real tangible impact in a community? And that is not like a friend of mine who works at the UN at a Hatch conference was talking about this. Youth People often think like we can come into a local community and solve an issue that's endemic to that problem. Hell no. A local person who's dealing with that issue knows how best to solve that issue in the context of that culture or subculture.
Mhm.
So it's also just having the humility to know that we don't know what is best for a local community,
Mhm.
but how we create local impact means we're empowering the local community in the most tangible, practical ways.
Mhm.
So a friend of ours who's around the corner in the next village over, one of the things he's doing is he's just raised $50,000 to build a soccer field
Mhm.
because in the next village over, they don't have the space and real estate is expensive. So he came and raised the money, is making that difference. And so any way that we can like of all of our properties, it's really key for us to be working with a local lead.
Mhm.
Cohere is a member-owned interstitial tissue to accelerate the development of these regenerative hubs around the world.
Mhm.
It's not we're coming in, we're not building Marriott's for the LA scene and where we can all look pretty and take pictures of ourselves. This is how do we actually build these hubs that are prototypical, replicable, empower the local economy, and drive money into the local economy in the most practical ways, guided by the local NGOs, the local people in need.
Mhm.
That's what we're about. And but there are these incredibly systemic issues that are just endemic to the nature of society right now that we want to be a contribution to, but
Mhm.
we don't know what to do other than what are these little things that we can do in the meantime.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. I agree with you that, say, hiring local labor and, having rewarding them not just in cash, but in equity, having them be co-owners, is a much better model than what we see with kind of just frankly neo-colonialism around the world, right? And what kind of the multinational corporate model generally is with of extracting resources, extracting cheap labor, things of that nature. So that sounds good. Kind of another related issue, and this is something that we debate and we talk about a lot as well, is so some of us are pretty skeptical of kind of the planned village movement where you're like, we're going to make a village. Because there's a lot of pushback on that of people saying, well, that's not organic enough, right? That's too top down. Um, cultures need to evolve through, the millions of little micro interactions between people in a place and their relationship to the environment and being in an environment. And, one thing that requires just being in a place for a long time and really getting to know it from the inside out. An issue I see with, say, the optionality of, say, having a network that you have of people who could just kind of move around um, at a whim is that they're never going to actually get that embodied, situated cognition that is the real driver of culture, right? And what I would think of as regenerative cultures. Um, and at the same time, I think that we can't avoid some, amount of forethought, some amount of intentionality. And like, even if you consider yourself like a localist and you're like, I want to build community, I don't have a preset plan for it, but I want to build, that's still an intention. So you can't get away from quote unquote, like the top down versus bottom up is not a very clean dichotomy. I don't think it's always mixed. It's more of a spectrum. I'm curious what you think about that of like, kind of spontaneous, complexity and evolution, interacting with kind of planned, networked, global kind of intentional movement.
Yeah, I really appreciate bringing this up. And yeah, embodied cognition, man. What a great way of saying that. I love that. Yeah, in my perspective, the idea of getting a bunch of friends and we go build a village in the middle of somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
it has not generally worked. I
Mm-hmm.
would say, in my perspective, the majority of the time that fails terribly.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, and I believe that it's because you're jumping the gun. Like it's like getting married before you've dated. Like in order to build a village, you need to have a rock solid culture. Like Forrest Landry talks a lot about the importance of the cultural piece. Well, how do you get to a culture? Well, you have to have a rock solid community. Well, how
Mm-hmm.
do you have a community? Well, you have to have trust. Well, how do you get trust? Break bread for months at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Have those conversations at 2 a.m. around the kitchen island where you're like, oh my gosh, you're doing this, I'm doing this. And you have to have that, just in my opinion, the most practical thing is that human to human connection.
Mm-hmm.
And for Cohere, because we hold this view, it is really essential for us to work in practical phases. Cohere, it's like right now in the process of buying a piece of property in Ecuador, a large 310 hectare piece of property. So that property is huge. We could build an entire village, but we are years from that because we don't have embodied cognition. We don't have that deep rootedness. We're still developing now our relationship to place. As an architect, my belief is that the earth shows us what wants to be built in each location. And all you got to do is shut up long enough and sit on the earth, study what's there. And then the solution comes to you versus like, oh, I have the solution. The the context gives you the solution. So study the context.
Mm-hmm.
In that vein, what I believe is that with Cohere, we are building these impact hubs, these co-working, co-living communities, where we bring people in for 3 to 6 months at a time, and they have the opportunity to connect to place, to connect to each other, and it becomes an informal vetting process
Mm-hmm.
to then see how do we take the time and study the land and start to build permanent homes.
Mm-hmm.
How do we start to restore the health of the ecosystem? Like in Ecuador, we're going to plant Paulownia trees. And then from that, they flower in 6 months. So we can start producing honey. It's an organic, seventh generation organic cattle farm ranch.
Mm-hmm.
And there's endless opportunities for how we help to revitalize the diversity of the ecosystem. And that's going to take us a long time to really be on that land and figure out how to do that in right relations. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a sequence. I also think things like Burning Man are a really profound example of uh, enough planning and enough individuation. And something that I often talk about is individuation without separation. This is a term that I got from my late mentor, Rennie Davis. Like we believe that every local community needs to individuate. It's its own culture. It's its own place. We're out to find the important nodes around the world where local communities are already kicking ass and doing amazing work, but they're lacking brand, they're lacking economics, they're lacking certain things. And if we can link those local initiatives together and keep those initiatives empowered as their own individuated thing, but we remove the separation. Now we remove the separation akin to a federation of like the Greek city states. We have economy around the world where we inherently all win if another node wins directly, one for one.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is what is practical. And then we can help grow and evolve into village over time.
Mm-hmm. What you're describing sounds like kind of like the vision of cosmo-localism. Are you familiar
Yep.
with that line of thinking and practice?
Yeah, I relate to that to a certain extent, not in great depth, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, the basic idea is that you want to localize a lot of the production, and you want to, regenerate local cultures and local ecologies, and have these kind of, pluralism of, expression around the world. But you also want to have some kind of solidarity network. In the technical sense, like in the way that, say, Michel Bauwens talks about it, is that you design global, you manufacture local, right? And so you have these kind of open source kind of exchange of knowledge, exchange of things like manufacturing designs, just of best practices, and then different localities can kind of adapt them as they see fit. They can experiment, they can generate new knowledge, which then can go to the kind of the planetary network. And so, yeah, it sounds somewhat like that, which is neat.
Yeah, that to me is just so freaking practical. But I don't know. And to me, it's not about like, I was in a friend's, the friend Jonathan was hosting this like community meetings gathering the other day.
Mm.
And this fellow was sharing how the importance of, from an economic perspective, to have a multitude of economic systems coexisting concurrently.
Yeah.
And yeah, and in that vein, I don't believe there's a one solution fits all.
Mm-hmm.
Cohere is bringing people together who vibe with what we're doing, and we think it's going to make a difference in the world. But by no means do we think that this is the end all be all or the best of the best or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing our work to research and figure out how can we practically move the needle forward. And we have a lot of sister organizations that have similar initiatives and different takes on things. And we're all about like the idea of the survival of the fittest to me is it's clearly outdated. You know, like a healthy forest is a forest where the trees are feeding each other. That's a real thing.
Right. Although the trees are still competing for sunlight.
Yeah. And so it's like maybe it's like not like there's no one solution. There is still like different nodes. But for me, it's just like how can we be of service to all the other people who are working in similar different initiatives, different takes, because my God, like the more the merrier at this point, in my opinion.
Right. So let me ask you, like, in terms of thinking about kind of the economics of this. So you talked about like, people kind of buy in with equity, or they put in some kind of value. And so far we've talked about this in terms of like kind of just building up the properties in general, building up the village, so to speak. In terms of kind of like how it integrates with the local economy, you've talked about, hiring locals, even giving them kind of ownership stake in the network itself. Do you also see like people in these places, say, generating useful goods and services that are exchanged, say, in the local economies? Like, do you see this kind of integration with the local economy as well? And
Yeah.
like, are these little economies that you're developing, not just little villages?
Well, I think they will over time. So I'll give two examples. In Ecuador, we are going to reforest, and we have the finances because what we're doing to then loan cash for like 0% down to our neighbors so they reforest their land.
Mm-hmm.
And that increases the watershed and then increases the property value of the original property.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's like, in Lake Atitlan, if we come in and we finance, like Chris Lindstrom's got this amazing composting toilet that, he's been developing, that our friends have been building in Tulum. What if we come in and 0% finance toilets, updated composting toilets for everyone in this village if they want it?
Mm-hmm.
Like now that immediately starts to clean the water.
Mm-hmm.
And so like there's that kind of thing where like, because I'm kind of a firm believer, like the biggest impact you can do is helping with infrastructure. Infrastructure is such a huge flywheel.
Right.
And then there's like, I'll take a different example. Like we've been talking to a friend, Thomas Hahn, who has a retreat center in Grezgen, this small village outside of Basel. Mm-hmm. This village is indigenous as anywhere else. They've had people living there for like continually for thousands of years, and family lines that go that far back, like continuously intact. So inside of that local community, one of the things that's really exciting is he bought an amazing retreat center. They're building a restaurant. They're building these very tangible things that the village needs. And if that becomes part of Cohere Network, we can help them raise more capital through our economic model and help them accelerate, then they're immediately helping on some fundamental baseline needs in this rural village. Mm-hmm. So it's really multifaceted, but ever evolving. And we don't really know, honestly, what's best and what the best process is. Mm-hmm. All our take is what we do know is that if we house change makers and align economic incentives so as all to work together, we'll discover the best practices as we go, and we'll discover the people who are already doing best practices, and we can just funnel them resources.
Nice. Nice. Okay. So kind of mentioned before. So, it seems like a lot of you are very young. Seems like not a lot of parents yet, for example. How do you see these villages evolving in terms of, like, there's always the tension between the communal aspect and the private aspect, right? And some of the
Yeah.
communes in the past didn't work out because, people like to have their own space as well, right? People also like to have their own property as well. And so there's always this kind of balance to strike between, say, the communal hall and the individual living space. And this especially, I think, becomes salient when people start having kids, right? And start growing families and realizing that, a nameless kind of nobody knows whose kids are whose and everybody's taking care of everyone often fails spectacularly in practice. And so I'm wondering kind of how you're thinking about this tension between communality and, I guess subsidiarity of, like, in this case, subsidiarity of the family, or we could frame it as, nested commons where, family structures are also their own commons as well.
Hmm. Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I think nested commons is a great way to be thinking about it, honestly. I, for one thing to note, because you asked this question earlier and I got sidetracked, so I didn't answer it.
Mhm.
The around the demographic of our user profile. So
Mhm.
we have an entire market of remote working and digital nomads, right? And that's ballooning, like growing at extreme space.
Mhm.
The interesting thing in digital nomad market segment in is that people think that is like 20-year-olds.
Mhm.
The truth is, the majority of people, the lion's share of that, are retirees.
Mhm. Mhm.
People don't associate that with, it's like, at least the often times people don't associate that.
Mhm.
So one of the things for us is that we are not about like, we're not Soho House. We're not about like, yeah, let's together and look all cute and hot with each other. We're bringing together people of all ranges of backgrounds, all ranges of age.
Mhm.
And it's really about the merit of what you're bringing. We get preferred access that people want to be of contribution and grow this ecosystem.
Mhm.
And so our members range from people in their 20s to people in their 70s.
Mhm.
So that's one thing I wanted to know. And I think what I hear you saying is that we're not doing a good job representing that on our website. So
Well, I only
we've
saw like
gotten
one or two pictures, and it was a bunch of young, seemingly very embodied and happy. Maybe everyone was on Molly or something, and young and attractive, mostly white. And I was like, yeah, that seems groovy, but that doesn't represent majority of humanity.
Yep, yeah, for sure. No, that's a great point, man. I really appreciate that.
Mm.
Um, the other thing is oh, my friend's just coming in here into the house that I was mentioning earlier. Um, one of the things with children and families, I think that the way you said it, nested commons is so great, is that the differentiation of private space to common space is oftentimes one of the challenging points with intentional communities is that there's not a differentiation. And everyone's like living in a single family home on top of each other, and it's a pain in the ass, and there's not enough kitchen space, and someone's
Mm.
peeing all over the toilet seat.
Mm.
So that's why we're so committed to building from scratch wherever possible.
Mm.
Private, individuated spaces with shared amenities. People can come in and come out as much as they so choose based on their disposition and their needs. So
Mm.
that's just a critical thing for us in a practical sense is um, providing the architectural solution that makes that possible.
Mm. Okay. Okay. Um, you mentioned that you mentioned like sister organizations, and you've also mentioned these kind of broader movements. What are some other kind of, I guess, complementary movements that you've been inspired by or that you collaborate with? You mentioned Game B. Do you guys consider yourself a proto B, as Jim Rutt puts it, or I also have in mind like Earth Regenerators and what Joe Brewer is doing, and they're really trying to think in terms of kind of bioregional scale and designing around landscapes. Of course, you have networks like Regen Network, which they're thinking about kind of the regenerative finance aspect and how do you really value these other forms of what we're calling capital that aren't narrowly financial capital, and several others. Do you want to talk about kind of how you've related to these other organizations and where you've seen resonance, and also where you see like, okay, this is actually, but I also see a niche that we can fill that isn't being filled.
Yeah, I think that there's one of the things that occurs for me. Apologies, I have to moving outside here. Some friends are just getting back. Um, One of the things that I see is there's need for all the sister orgs and more.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know Joe, but I've been tracking his work. I think they're doing incredible stuff. Greg and Will from Regen, I just love what they and their team are doing. And the for us, like the more we can nest and amp the sister orgs, the better. Like one thing we've been talking about in kind of the larger conversation is how we index our tokens together in the refi space.
Mm-hmm.
And that starts to become really exciting, especially as other orgs, yeah, there's all sorts of amazing refi things that we can do when we start to nest and index together.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really a matter of the more the merrier. The more the scale and order of magnitude of what we're facing as a humanity
Mm-hmm.
is so insanely huge
Yeah.
that the idea that one org is like leading the charge is stupid to me. It's
Mm-hmm.
we're all doing what we can, and the more we can amp each other, the better. And the more we can help incumbents come in, the better. And if we equity swap, if we token swap, if we bundle together, then we're creating a regenerative economic model that can actually, like if you look at Wall Street's so effective because they're all in bed with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the regenerative movement needs to take a lesson from that.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of where like proto gain B, or I'm not sure how you were saying it, Jim was saying it,
Proto B.
likely
Mm-hmm.
proto B. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. And that's what we want to be in service to. And we're figuring it as we go.
One thought I had was the importance of training skills. And this is something that we focus a lot on in Doomer Optimism, is that many people have become very disembodied, right? Many people have forgotten how to work with their hands, right? This could be how to farm, how to grow food, right? How to build things, how to fix things, right? Fix appliances, practical stuff, right? And one of the things that we're kind of actively talking about is the need to kind of recreate these educational institutions. And to me, the model is kind of like a bioregional field school, right? Where you have kind of very experiential learning. You have, people on site learning how to build, learning how to grow, as part of this program. And then, after they finish, they're matched up with, kind of a living situation where they can actually carry this on into a livelihood, maybe in the same place or maybe somewhere else. I'm curious, like, how you're thinking about just the skill building component, right? Like, if you want to build, I know you're an architect, so it seems like some of the skills are there, but a lot of people, if you're just a programmer or you're just you come from the finance industry and you got interested in regenerative finance, in terms of providing other sorts of value, to kind of a functioning living situation, is there some kind of like training component, or is it just about kind of attracting the people who already have the skills?
Yeah, great question. It's really one of these things that's ever evolving.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I'll take it closest to home for me.
Mm-hmm.
So, in Europe, as an architect, one of the key ways you get established is through competitions.
Mm-hmm.
And competitions are really expensive to enter. I mean, they can be $4,000 a pop to enter like a real real competition.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if we put out a call for like, okay, we're gonna build 5 new cabins in the Costa Rica property. What if we put that out to the world and said, hey, compete in this process, but your entry fee is actually an investment. And whoever we select out of the 50 firms that apply, our community will select one, but everyone else, their fee is actually going to they're going to actually get a reward no matter what, if they get selected or not.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can NFT every design and put that on our website. And if someone else in the network or the meta network wants another design, we can make sure that IP and the fee is getting back to the original firm.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like a very practical way that we're looking at crowdsourcing and crowdfunding, designs for like a cabin.
Mm-hmm.
And we can extrapolate that out to anything. So what becomes exciting then on like I was talking to Matt from Future Horizons yesterday, and what they're doing in like this amazing gamification and their quests around regenerative impact. Like they're kicking ass and doing amazing organizational, like everything to do that. Well, for us then, I rather plug in what they're doing and not have to figure that out ourselves.
Mm.
And then have a sister org get amped because we have the property and they can just apply their principles on it. And with that said, there's like an infinite potential for us to go to our sister org, say like, okay, you want to do that? Great. Well, you want to do that here? You want to do that in a property in Ecuador? Like, if you have a cohort people want to do that, great. We got another piece of property where we could immediately be putting people to work. And you can do that under your brand, but inside of an umbrella where when you make the improvements to the land, you become a shareholder. And then we all get the upside. So anyway, we can just be really practical and then support these sub initiatives or sister initiatives or parent initiatives, the better. And just keep moving the ball forward in the most practical way.
Okay, so let me throw out a scenario and let me and let me know if you see this as part of what you guys are doing. So say I'm like a young 20-year-old. I'm interested in these ideas. Say I don't have many practical skills. I grew up in a suburb. I maybe I have a college degree, maybe I don't, but maybe it's not that applicable. And I basically want to go to one of these villages, offer as my value my labor. I'll have to be trained, right? So say it's helping to build one of these structures, right? So I'll come as an apprentice, and by putting in my work and slowly developing the skills over time on site, I'll also gain equity within the network itself. And then as these skills build, I can either choose to stay there or go to one of these other nodes in the network. Is that kind of like a pathway that you see?
I do. I really do. And that's something that really, really excites me.
Mm-hmm.
And as a startup, like one of the things that I struggle with sometimes is that everyone thinks you're more capitalized and you're more able to do what you're able to do as a startup at what the phase.
Mm-hmm.
But 1,000,000%. I mean, if we can become a practical onboarding for people to come in, plug in, get paid, and get trained, get long-term stake, grow practical skills, I believe that's going to become an extremely important structure that Cohere can provide. And because there's such potential for fiat money dropping, the risk of hyperinflation, the risk of systemic economic collapse in the larger global macroeconomics, the ability to be building an economy based on a store of value of regenerative hard assets, I think has the potential to become very, very significant. And if that becomes a training mechanism wherein we can take people who don't have certain practical skills and they can learn that and do that in like a way that was incredibly fun and like meaningful and impactful.
Right.
Yeah, I see that scaling out like crazy.
Nice. What have you all developed kind of protocols for decision making for kind of how basically you've talked about the ability of exit, so this is, I guess, a question about voice in this kind of traditional dichotomy. Do you follow any kind of protocols that are already out there, or are you kind of just evolving it and figuring it out as you go? I'm curious how you make decisions, how you deal with power dynamics, things of that nature.
Yeah, it's such a hugely important subject. And it's also one where idealism can get in the way of progress and sabotage itself. And as a startup, what's been really key for us is we have to be lean and nimble and agile. And that is the value of a centralized core team. So we hosted a lab last year where we brought together 25 experts around the world on how do we set up a Cohere DAO. And ultimately, at the end of it, we're like, oh my gosh, we cannot take that on this year. It's just wicked complex. But that is where we want to go. Like, it's funny, we're using C-level titles and we're using a C corp to leverage precedent law. Like, this is one of these things where, like, a C corp doesn't have to be an evil thing. It's precedent law is most robust with C corp, so it gives us the most flexibility. We can write bylaws however we so choose in a C corp. You can write an LLC to operate like a land trust. It's where precedent law gives us the most protection and therefore the most access to mainstream capital that we can move into getting B. And through decentralized power decision structures, I was talking to Tom Thompson the other day, one of the co-founders of Holacracy, and we're extremely excited about how we integrate holacratic decentralized decision making. And they've developed insanely awesome protocols. And we're very excited about bringing that into the system. And as a startup, we have to make sure that we are bringing the cash, we're getting to revenue, we're expanding what we can do right now, and then intelligently decentralize over time, or else we'll flounder under the complexity of some of the most cutting edge and complex things in the world, really.
Yeah, interesting. I'm guessing you're familiar with like Richard Bartlett's kind of micro solidarity framework. You mentioned kind of a core team. He would call that like a crew, and he one of the things that he emphasizes a lot is the importance of these kind of nested structures and networks, where you want to have, you don't want to have a completely flat network. You want to have, say a network of crews of like 5 or 6 people, focusing on certain things, working well together, figuring out how to work well together. As he puts it, work outside of the mode of domination. But then you also might have, forget what he calls everyone, but then you might have like a group of like 50 that, break down into crews, but, for larger scale issues, you meet and then expands out from there. I'm curious, how you relate to that kind of framework.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the question of how I relate to it is dependent on the progression of the company and the needs of the company and the movement at whatever point we're referring to. I think like pro-social and like sociocratic methods, or where we have leads that one of the things I think is extremely detrimental is consensus. When you're outside of your decision-making zone, or excuse me, your expertise zone.
Right.
I know how to cook well, but I'm no chef. So my decision-making on, certain things in that vein is not as useful. Right. Now I can really crush some dishes. Like I can clean like best, as good as anybody. So like there's just like that meritocracy of decision-making, I think, is really critical. And that's where that sub-nesting becomes so key. Otherwise, and many communities fall victim to this thing that we're all equal. We're not equal. We all have different degrees. I am not an equal chef to my buddy Rafa, who's a Michelin star chef. I'm not. Now we all have equal merit. We all have equal value. We're all human beings. We all have all. So it's not to. We don't want to collapse the intrinsic worth of a human being, right. And we want to be real where our expertises are. and so. Yeah. You see what I think.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I think that this is, we've had some people on recently, who are part of, they consider themselves anarchists, and, and this is something that they're trying to figure out all the time, right? Because, kind of theoretically, you want horizontal decision-making structures. You don't want patterns of domination arising. You want to, they want to abolish patterns of domination, but you do have to work with realities that people do have different skills, capacities, and interests, right? And so the question of how you honor that and how you honor people's natural inclinations and, and capacities, while also, not letting that, evolve into some kind of solidified hierarchy is, a pretty wicked problem, right? That I don't think anyone has totally figured out, how to do that. But, that is I think it sounds like your organization and many others in this space, like that's something that you're constantly trying to navigate and figure out, and you have to balance idealism with pragmatism, et cetera. And so, yeah.
Well, I think it's also a very charged. What I mean to say is that the baseline economics that we're inside of, the water we're swimming in, is a petro or fueled like fiat monetary system.
Right.
That inherently is a win-lose situation. And this is where like Donnie with Post Growth Institute has really been opening my mind to new awarenesses, but his work is great. But one of the things that is really critical for us in like a pragmatic baby step way is what happens when we all co-own the commons. Now, maybe a micro commons, like the fractal nature of reality seems to imply that that's a pretty effective way of looking at it. But inside the monetary system we have now, there is no win-win, or there's very few win-wins.
Right.
And so when like if we start to have an economic system where we all have a monetary system where we literally always win when we're helping the other, then it removes a lot of these baseline issues that are just inherent, but we don't even acknowledge because we're so in the water of this crony capitalistic system. Yeah, I don't know if I'm communicating effectively, but it's like people have such scarcity when there is such an unequal distribution of value. And if you know that doing the right thing, stewarding the land, helping a collaborator inherently increases your financial value, that's a game changer. Versus every time I use my credit card or pull money out of the ATM, I'm just siphoning money off into a couple centralized crony banks.
Another thought just came to mind. So one thing that we're navigating in Doomer Optimism is that there are different kind of cultural backgrounds. There's people who, I think have a more meta-modern sensibility, right? Kind of like, and they're coming at it from, that point of view. And there's other people who have more of a kind of traditional conservative sensibility. And then we also have people kind of, very kind of leftist. You have also people who consider themselves more right wing. And how do you navigate these real differences in values, in moral values? And that's something that we're, I think continually trying to work out. And I can imagine, say, if you're located in a place that's located within a more traditional society, some of the ideas about family structure, even things like patriarchy might be, you might bump up against some very real cultural differences, right? Like you might be in a Catholic village, right? And they're very Catholic, right? And this idea of polyamory, for example, or something else might actually be very offensive to them, right? And so I'm wondering, have you guys run into like these kind of cultural differences where, more on the kind of traditional end, let's say, and more on the hippie end, of how you conduct yourself, how you live, how you form families, etc.?
Yeah, I would say that yes and no in some ways. Like friends of ours, Ange and Kyle, they have a movement called Correlation, where they build these beautiful sculptures and then sink them into coral reefs and then electrically charge them to accelerate the regrowth of coral. I think they are leading the charge in how you work with local communities through art. And they're in Dominican Republic, and they are looking to raise capital through Cohere. So we build a Cohere location at this coral restoration project, and we bring people there to learn about coral restoration and bring more money and resources to their project. And they are just doing such incredible work in how do you actually build with local community. And still, the structure, they built this giant structure that was an indigenous icon. And the local Catholic community was like, oh my gosh, that is that's anti the church. This is terrible. And he created a rift in the community between the indigenous and the Catholics and them. And they handled it beautifully and it's all fine. But that to me, as in the network, is something that, was an example to me of like where those values can really get a little bit butted to, fronting each other.
Right.
And I really have no idea what is best, really. I think that my sense, honestly, inside the political divide, like let's say in the United States experience, is my friends were like, quote unquote, very conservative and others were quote unquote very liberal, all share the same fundamental values. Like I've never met anyone who, when I haven't had like a long car ride with them, or like not like, oh yeah, you value the same things.
Right.
Like it's never not happened to me. So I think mostly it's just like the labeling and the BS that comes through. Like best way to hoodwink a population is get them fighting each other. Like, and so like with all these bizarre labels in the United States, for instance, and many other countries, and the rise of populism and authoritarianism, but it's all just like we all want the same thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, this came to mind because there was an article that just came out in the Vanity Fair. Jason Pogue, who's kind of a friend of the DO Network, he's been investigating what they call the new right or the dissident right movement in the United States and around the world. And, some aspects of it, are very misaligned with, I would say, my values. Like there is very strong elements of racism in the movement, not entirely, but some. There's, kind of a belligerent nationalism or something, things of that nature. Even what you might call proto-fascism. But a lot of the critiques that they have are very similar to, say, the anti-globalization battle in Seattle critiques of leftists in the late 90s, right? Like there's this horseshoe theory thing going on, and from a perspective of a liberal, that's like, oh, this is terrifying. This is the rise of fascism, and maybe they're correct, and maybe we should all be extremely worried. But it seems to me that there is also an opportunity to kind of diffuse the really kind of destructive elements of that and find common ground, because it seems a lot of what they're looking for is, we want to rediscover a sense of place, a sense of cultural identity, right? And if you're in one part of the world, this is seen as decolonialization. But, if you're, say, a white person in America with a history of slavery, with a history of colonization, that can be perceived as white supremacy, or that can be perceived as fascism, right? And, the thing that I'm trying to figure out is, how do we support people to connect in communities, to connect back with the land, connect back with each other, to steward the land? How do we do it in a way where, it's pluralistic, meaning different communities can find their own forms of expression? It's not xenophobic, though, because we're networked with each other around the world, and we're developing these kind of solidarity networks, kind of like what the Zapatistas talk about with Zapatismo, of developing, autonomies everywhere and then linking up and supporting each other. And it's just a very kind of, there's a lot of upheaval right now. There's a lot of turmoil right now, and it's not clear where it'll all shake out, right? Whether, we will develop into these kind of pluralistic, pro-social global networks that all support each other and, are, for example, not racist, hopefully, right? But at the same time, it can go in that direction, or it could go into kind of like a new ethno-nationalist kind of, movement that, for me, is a terrifying prospect. I guess I'm just kind of, I don't know if that's a question, but kind of what you see, if you've noticed the dynamics. One example here is like the permaculture movement, right? I think the biggest influx of people interested in permaculture are very right-wing conservatives, right? And the permaculture movement is trying to deal with this because, on the one hand, it's like, well, the more people that get involved with holistic land stewardship, the better. But we're also worried that, they're going to bring, values into the movement that, are, can be very, let's just say fascist. I'm curious if you've noticed these dynamics and what you think about how do you navigate them?
Yeah, no, I definitely have noticed. I mean, I think there's a paradigm shift at
Mm,
large afoot.
yeah.
And I think that as what's his Tom, what's the friend was saying is like there's like the kind of the whole metamodernist approach of like or the thought of there's the rise of like Chinese authoritarianism,
Hmm.
Mad Max collapse, and then the third attractor.
Right.
And I found that really helpful to think in that way because it occurs to me a little bit like the tale of two cities. It's the worst of times and the best of times.
Mhm.
And it's like the to like kind of put it in odd terms, like the fracturing of the hologram, if you will, right? It's like we're choosing our reality. And I
Mhm.
think quantum mechanics really shows that like the nature of reality is so dependent on the observer,
Mhm.
in that there is a movement that is leading to like massive collapse. And then there are movements of light, like progress in the world where people are coming together for the win-win solutions.
Mhm.
And and I think because we're in such a disruptive time right now, that I think there'll be a continual collapsing of institutions. And I think you see this in the United States, where there's a complete loss of trust in the institutions
Yeah.
because of the infiltration of cronyism, in my opinion. I brought that word up a lot, but I think it's really is a huge factor of why the public no longer trusts the CDC when you have like evil pharmaceutical companies and like all the crazy stuff that is happening in every industry
Yeah.
where you have just too much power in a few companies' hands. Um, so yeah, I think that I think we are in a time of just like extreme radical change, and it's an exponential curve. I
Yeah.
think climate change is an exponential curve. I think the collapse of many things are accelerating with jerk. But I think that's all actually very exciting, because if we come together and we find those win-wins, then we can like I really love the research that shows that you want to bring two gangs together and get beyond their stuff,
Mhm.
create a superordinate goal.
Mhm.
That's how you move beyond gang violence effectively, is you get groups of people of different views and you get them focused on something more important than their BS.
Mhm.
And I think as humanity, as more and more people recognize to the situation that we're in, there's a superordinate goal.
Mhm.
And what we're doing out of ignorance is destroying the planet. What we can do out of coordination and consciousness is like infinite.
Mhm.
Like what we can do as a humanity is incredible. So I think that we're experiencing that, and it leaves me the doomsday actually leaves me super optimistic, because that aligns people to get beyond the BS and actually
Yeah.
find the win-wins.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Um, I'm curious what you think about. So recently had a conversation with Gregory Landua and Daniel Schmachtenberger. Hasn't been released yet. Where Daniel, of course, is very concerned about these kind of large scale multipolar traps, right? And global dynamics. And he doesn't focus as much or emphasize on this kind of relocalization aspect, at least he only does tangentially. And one of the kind of, I wouldn't say tension, but maybe it was a creative tension in that conversation was, both thinking in terms of, yeah, like, nuclear proliferation is a large scale problem, right? Or, the dynamics between the America and China in terms of addressing climate change. Like if they don't get on board, then it's not going to happen, right? So, and he's trying to figure out things at that scale. Um, and I was emphasizing the importance of kind of relocalization, getting in touch with relation to the land and place. But, I was also, I think, trying to make the argument that if we can develop a network of communities doing this around the world, this kind of cosmolocalism idea, that, that this, perhaps not directly, but indirectly could help to address the larger scale multipolar traps that he's so worried about. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, of like these kinds of movements that you're a part of, and you or others are part of. Do you see them addressing this kind of diagnosis that Schmachtenberger brings to the table?
Yeah, I frankly don't know. And I think my sense is that it's really all the above.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, yeah, I really don't have enough of insights to say. My sense and my sensibility, my approach is that a decentralized network of localized movements that are focusing on the fundamental basic human needs, I think does become a flywheel for systemic change that can then address things as important as nuclear proliferation treaties.
Right.
But it's
Or
in a practical sense,
biotechnology, the dangers of
yeah,
biotechnology or artificial intelligence, et cetera, et cetera.
I think we can get overly romantic around the impact of the localized movement when there is such a power structure system at the top that is so solidified. But yeah, I don't know. I just think it's just a matter of, like, for me, it's just like, what is in my wherewithal to help move forward.
Right.
And I think, yeah, I really just deeply cherish both those guys and their points of view in the world. And I think they're all of it's accurate. It's just a matter of, like, how we'll see. We just have to do the work and see and get the data and make the world a better place in doing so.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree. Um, okay. Well, I think we can wrap up pretty soon. I want to give you the final platform. Anything that you think we haven't kind of sufficiently explored, or that you'd like to kind of bring to the table? I want to kind of, yeah, give you a chance. Or if there's, sometimes I frame it as, if there's a question that you wish I had asked and you want to answer, I want to kind of give you the platform here.
Okay. Yeah, I would say a question I wish you had asked. Nothing pops up to mind. I would say the what occurs to me right now is just a real appreciation and gratitude for people like you who are hosting this type of discourse. And I think it's just really such a beautiful process that is emerging in the world right now, of people hosting really quality content and bringing intellectualism into the movements. And so I just am really thankful to be here with you and to be able to be a small part of that. And I think that it's of utmost importance, honestly. I would say on the Cohere side, like right now, what we're doing is we're looking to invite people who are aligned with what we feel inspired and aligned and want to help build out, this network of practically oriented regenerative communities that can evolve and grow, and see the value of building a new member-owned economic system, and want to just bring their wisdom to this network and see how this network can then nest inside the meta network and all the other sister networks. So that's really my invite. If what we're doing at Cohere resonates with people, then please, by all means, yeah, let us know, pop in, become a member, and yeah, let's do this thing together.
And what's the best way for somebody to connect with you? Is it through their Twitter handle at Cohere Network, or somewhere
Yeah.
else?
Yeah, any of the above. I mean, I really prioritize making myself available to
Mhm.
anyone and everybody. Yeah, so my email, Dakotah with an H at Cohere Network.
Mhm.
Or people can always just directly email me. Our Twitter handle or Insta handles, all the social media. And then our website will be launching the founding membership here soon. We are getting ready to open up an online community space that highlights the properties that we are onboarding and the properties that we're looking to fundraise for. So that's like the property in Ecuador, a Polish castle that's been fully renovated across from Prague. Angie Kyle's coral restoration, collaboration with the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture in Montana. There's the partnership with John Milton with the Way of Nature Foundation. There's a pipeline of investment opportunities that we're lining up for the regenerative real estate side, and a network of locations. And yeah, anyone who feels inspired to be part of that and building up the infrastructure, we welcome it.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, we'll put all this information in the show notes. So if people want to follow up, Dakotah, thank you very much. This is fun. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I find what you all are doing very intriguing. I think our general stance is with these kinds of projects is a bit of skepticism, but I think it's, we're trying to make it a useful skepticism, not a tearing down, but a constructive skepticism. And so, but, I think one of these experiments, sets of experiments, are going to produce real innovation and real knowledge. And I think that, how you're thinking about things and all the things you guys have considered, I think you're really on the right track, and it's very inspiring. So thanks for coming on. And yeah, this is great. Until next time.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Cool. Take care, Dakotah.